Tonight we begin with a simple question that's going to make you appreciate your morning coffee routine in ways you never imagined. Picture this. You wake up tomorrow, but instead of your cozy bedroom, you're lying on a pile of rotting straw in a one-room hovel that reeks of human waste, animal filth, and something else you can't quite identify but desperately wish you couldn't smell. Welcome to your new life in a medieval village, where surviving until sunset isn't guaranteed, and your biggest concern isn't whether Wi-Fi is working, but whether you'll make it through the next meal without contracting dysentery. Forget the romanticized castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. We're about to take a journey through what daily life actually looked like for 90% of medieval Europe's population. And trust me, it's going to make your worst Monday morning feel like a luxury spa experience. You think you're tough because you survived a power outage or complained about slow internet. Let's see how you handle a world where a simple cut could mean death, where your breakfast might be crawling with maggots, and where privacy is about as common as unicorns. Tonight, we're diving deep into the brutal reality of medieval village life, and by the end of this journey, you'll be kissing the ground your modern plumbing stands on. If you'd like more stories like this one, please subscribe so you don't miss any new uploads. I'd also love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day you're tuning in. Before we get to the really fun stuff like medieval toilet arrangements and the delightful aroma of unwashed bodies pressed together in confined spaces, let's start with something seemingly innocent. Let's talk about waking up. Your eyes open to darkness so complete it feels like being buried alive. There are no windows in your hovel because glass is a luxury reserved for the wealthy, and even if you could afford it, you wouldn't want it. Windows in medieval villages were basically invitations for thieves, wild animals, and the various unsavory characters who wandered the countryside looking for easy targets. The only light filtering into your living space comes from gaps in the walls, where the mud and straw mixture has cracked and fallen away, and even those precious slivers of illumination reveal more than you'd like to see. The floor beneath you isn't a floor in any sense you'd recognize. It's packed dirt mixed with rushes, straw, and what can generously be called organic matter, but what you and I would recognize as a festering carpet of human and animal waste, food scraps, and the occasional decomposing rodent. This charming surface hasn't been cleaned in months, maybe years, because the concept of sanitation, as we understand it, simply doesn't exist. You share this space with your entire family, possibly including grandparents, siblings, cousins, and whatever livestock you're lucky enough to own. Privacy is a modern invention, and personal space is about as foreign a concept as democracy or dental hygiene. Every breath you take fills your lungs with the concentrated essence of medieval life: unwashed bodies, rotting food, animal dung, and the sweet perfume of decay that permeates everything. Your clothes, if you can call them that, are more like rags held together by hope and desperation. They haven't been washed in weeks because soap is expensive and time is scarce, and the fabric is rough wool that feels like wearing a hair shirt designed by someone with a particularly cruel sense of humor. But here's the thing that'll really make you appreciate your morning routine. You can't just stumble to the bathroom and flip on the lights. There is no bathroom, there are no lights. There's just you, the darkness, and the growing realization that your bladder has been full for hours, and your options for relief are limited to a corner of the room, the yard outside where the pigs root around, or if you're feeling fancy, the communal latrine that's shared with everyone in the village and hasn't been cleaned since the last harvest festival. The moment your feet hit that delightful floor mixture, you're reminded that shoes are also a luxury you can't afford. Your bare feet make contact with God knows what, and that squishing sensation between your toes isn't mud. It's a cocktail of decomposed organic matter that would make a modern health inspector weep and immediately quarantine the entire area. But you don't have the luxury of being disgusted because this is your reality every single day, and complaining won't change the fact that you need to start your day if you want to survive until evening. The first order of business isn't brushing your teeth or checking your phone. It's making sure you're still alive and that nobody broke into your hovel during the night to steal your meager possessions, or worse. Medieval villages weren't exactly bastions of law and order, and bandits, wolves, and desperate neighbors were constant threats that made every night an adventure in survival. You do a quick inventory of your belongings, which takes about 30 seconds because medieval peasants owned almost nothing, and what they did own was frequently borrowed, stolen, or repossessed by their lord for various infractions, debts, or simply because he felt like it. Your most valuable possessions might include a rusty knife, a wooden bowl that's seen better decades, maybe a blanket that's more holes than fabric, and if you're incredibly fortunate, a small collection of tools that represent your life's work and your only hope of earning enough to eat. The irony is delicious. In a world where people owned almost nothing, theft was rampant because that almost nothing represented the difference between life and death. While you're conducting this depressing inventory, your stomach reminds you that it's been empty for longer than you'd like to admit, and breakfast is going to be an adventure in creative nutrition that would challenge even the most adventurous modern foodie. Let's talk about breakfast, shall we? Forget your artisanal coffee and organic toast. Your morning meal, if you're lucky enough to have one, consists of whatever you managed to scrounge up the previous day, mixed with whatever hasn't rotted overnight. The staple of your diet is bread, but not the fluffy white Wonder Bread you're imagining. This is dark, dense, coarse bread made from whatever grain you could afford, mixed with sawdust, ground bones, and occasionally actual flour if you've been particularly blessed by fortune or divine intervention. The texture is somewhere between cardboard and concrete, and the taste is an acquired one that you've been acquiring your entire life because there's literally nothing else available. This bread is often moldy because storage in a damp, poorly ventilated hovel isn't exactly ideal for preserving baked goods, but you eat it anyway because throwing away food is tantamount to suicide when your next meal isn't guaranteed. The mold adds a special flavor profile that ranges from bitter to actively poisonous, and distinguishing between the two requires a level of expertise that comes from years of playing Russian roulette with your digestive system. If you're feeling particularly wealthy, you might have some ale to wash down this feast. Notice I said ale, not water, because water in medieval villages is about as safe to drink as liquid mercury. The local water sources are contaminated with human waste, animal carcasses, and industrial runoff from various medieval industries like tanning and dyeing that made the rivers run colors not found in nature. Ale is safer because the brewing process kills most of the bacteria that would otherwise turn your intestines into a war zone, but it's weak ale, barely alcoholic, and tastes like someone mixed barley with regret and despair. Your breakfast beverage has an alcohol content that wouldn't impress a modern teenager, but it's enough to make starting your day feel slightly less hopeless while simultaneously ensuring that you're mildly buzzed from the moment you wake up until you pass out at night. The dining experience itself is something that would horrify modern health inspectors and probably violate several international treaties on human dignity. You eat with your hands because forks haven't been invented yet, and knives are precious tools that serve multiple purposes beyond food preparation. Your wooden bowl is shared with other family members and hasn't been properly cleaned in longer than you'd care to calculate, creating a delightful bacterial ecosystem that adds complexity to every meal. The table, if you're fortunate enough to have one, is a rough wooden surface that's seen everything from food preparation to medical procedures to the occasional birth or death, because medieval peasants were nothing if not efficient with their furniture usage. Sitting arrangements are informal, meaning everyone clusters around the food source and attempts to consume their share before someone else claims it, because sharing in medieval times was less about politeness and more about survival of the quickest. The conversation during this meal revolves around practical concerns like whether the Lord's tax collectors will arrive today, which crops are failing, who in the village died overnight, and whether the various aches and pains everyone's experiencing are signs of normal wear and tear or the beginning of something that'll kill them within the week. It's cheerful breakfast discussion that really sets the tone for a delightful day of medieval village life. But here's where things get really interesting. Once you've finished choking down your breakfast and successfully avoided immediate food poisoning, it's time to start your actual work day. And let me tell you, the concept of work-life balance was about as foreign to medieval peasants as space travel or human rights. Your workday begins before sunrise and ends after sunset, because medieval villages operate on agricultural schedules that don't care about your personal preferences or physical limitations. If you're a farmer, which is statistically likely since 90% of medieval people were involved in agriculture, your day involves backbreaking labor in fields that belong to someone else, using tools that were old when your grandfather was young, and working soil that's been depleted by generations of poor farming practices and lack of proper fertilization techniques. The irony is thick. You spend your entire day producing food, but you're chronically malnourished because most of what you grow belongs to your lord, and what's left over after taxes, tithes, and rent is barely enough to keep you alive until the next harvest season. Your farming tools are primitive by modern standards and would be considered museum pieces today, but they represent a significant investment for a medieval peasant family and are passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. A plow, if you're wealthy enough to own one, is a massive wooden contraption that requires multiple people to operate and breaks down frequently, usually at the most inconvenient times possible. Like during planting season, when every day lost means the difference between eating and starving during the winter months. Most of your farming is done with hand tools, hoes, sickles, and spades that are poorly made, frequently repaired, and ergonomically designed by people who apparently believed that human comfort was a sign of moral weakness. These tools will destroy your body over the course of your working life, leaving you with bent spines, arthritic hands, and the kind of chronic pain that modern medicine could easily treat. But medieval medicine addresses with prayer, leeches, and the occasional amputation if things get really serious. The actual work of farming in medieval times is a combination of skill, luck, desperation, and divine intervention that would make modern agricultural scientists weep with frustration. You're working with crop rotation techniques that are hit or miss at best, fertilization methods that rely heavily on human and animal waste, and pest control strategies that range from prayer to more prayer, with occasional cursing thrown in for variety. Your crops are constantly under threat from weather, insects, disease, wild animals, and roving bands of soldiers or bandits who view your fields as their personal buffet and don't particularly care whether you starve as a result of their dining habits. A single bad harvest can mean death for your entire family, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about factors like drought, flooding, or swarms of locusts that can destroy months of work in a matter of hours. The psychological pressure of knowing that your survival depends entirely on factors beyond your control creates a level of chronic stress that would require industrial-strength anxiety medication in modern times, but medieval peasants dealt with it through a combination of religious fatalism and alcoholic beverages that were barely stronger than modern beer, but were consumed from morning until night because, again, water wasn't safe to drink. Your relationship with the weather becomes intensely personal because too much rain can rot your crops, too little rain can kill them outright, and too much wind can destroy everything you've worked for in a single afternoon, leaving you with nothing but debt to your lord and the growing certainty that this winter is going to be particularly difficult for your family's survival prospects. But let's say you're not a farmer. Maybe you're one of the lucky few who practice a trade or craft that doesn't involve staring at dirt all day and praying that something edible will grow out of it. Congratulations. Your life is still absolutely terrible, just in different and creative ways that showcase the medieval period's remarkable talent for making every possible career path a journey through various forms of suffering and exploitation. If you're a blacksmith, you spend your days in a workshop that's basically a furnace designed to test the limits of human endurance, working with tools and techniques that haven't changed in centuries, and breathing air so thick with smoke and metal particles that your lungs are probably already planning their early retirement. The heat from your forge is unbearable in summer and barely adequate in winter, creating a working environment that's either scorching hot or freezing cold with no comfortable middle ground, because medieval technology hadn't quite mastered the concept of climate control or worker safety. Your hands are permanently scarred from burns, cuts, and the general abuse that comes from working with red-hot metal, using primitive tools and safety equipment that consists mainly of hoping for the best and accepting that injuries are just part of the job description. If you're a carpenter, you're working with hand tools that require enormous physical strength and skill to produce results that would be considered rough and unfinished by modern standards, but which represent the height of craftsmanship in medieval times, because precision manufacturing was still a few centuries away from being invented. Your workshop is poorly lit, inadequately ventilated, and filled with sawdust that gets into everything, including your lungs, where it will remain for the rest of your life, gradually reducing your breathing capacity and ensuring that your golden years, if you're lucky enough to have them, will be spent wheezing and coughing like a broken bellows. If you happen to be a woman in this medieval village, congratulations, your options are even more limited and significantly more dangerous than those available to men, which is saying something considering how spectacularly awful everyone else's lives are in this charming historical period. Your career choices are essentially limited to farming, domestic work, or various forms of textile production, all of which pay less than men's work and come with the added bonus of constant supervision by male relatives who have legal authority over every aspect of your existence. Marriage isn't a romantic partnership based on mutual affection and shared goals. It's an economic transaction designed to transfer you from your father's control to your husband's control, while hopefully producing enough children to ensure that someone survives to take care of the family when you're too old or broken down to work anymore. Your wedding day isn't a celebration of love. It's a business deal where you're the commodity being traded. And your opinions about the arrangement are about as relevant as your opinions about the weather or the price of grain in the local market. Childbirth, which you'll experience frequently because contraception is non-existent and family planning consists of hoping that some of your children survive to adulthood, is a life-threatening event that kills a significant percentage of women and is attended by midwives whose medical knowledge is based on tradition, superstition, and trial and error techniques that would be considered malpractice in any modern context. Each pregnancy is basically a roll of the dice with death, and the odds aren't in your favor. Especially considering your poor nutrition, constant physical stress, and complete lack of actual medical care that might help you survive the experience of bringing new life into this medieval nightmare. The domestic work that fills your days when you're not pregnant or recovering from childbirth is a never-ending cycle of tasks that would challenge modern appliances and make a full-time housekeeper quit in frustration. Cooking is done over an open fire using pots and pans that are hand-forged, poorly designed, and prone to burning everything you put in them while simultaneously failing to cook food thoroughly enough to kill the various bacteria and parasites that infest medieval ingredients. Water has to be hauled from wells or streams that are often contaminated with human waste and agricultural runoff, then boiled over fires that require constant attention and feeding with fuel that you've gathered yourself from whatever sources you can find. Cleaning is done without soap, using abrasive materials and techniques that are harsh on both dirt and human skin, and the results are primitive by modern standards but represent hours of back-breaking labor that leaves your hands raw and your back aching. Laundry is an all-day affair that involves hauling water, building fires, scrubbing clothes against rocks or rough wooden surfaces, and hoping that the fabric survives the process without falling apart completely, because replacing clothing is expensive and time-consuming when every piece of fabric has to be produced by hand using primitive spinning and weaving techniques. Your clothing is patched, repatched, and eventually turned into rags that serve various household purposes until they literally disintegrate from overuse. And the concept of a wardrobe with multiple outfits is about as realistic as owning a private jet or taking a vacation to somewhere tropical and relaxing. Let's take a moment to discuss the charming topic of medieval personal hygiene, because nothing says authentic historical experience like the aroma of unwashed humanity mixed with various bodily functions, and the general ode to medieval village that permeates everything within a 5-mile radius. Bathing is not a daily activity, or even a weekly activity, or really a regular activity of any kind, because heating enough water for a bath requires enormous amounts of fuel and time that medieval peasants simply don't have to spare for such luxurious pursuits. Most people wash their hands and faces occasionally, usually before eating or religious observances, using cold water and substances that barely qualify as soap but are better than nothing, which is often your other option for personal cleanliness. Full-body bathing happens a few times a year at most, usually in connection with religious holidays or major life events like weddings or funerals. And even then, it's a communal activity that involves sharing bathwater with multiple family members, because heating that much water is a major undertaking that can't be wasted on individual comfort. The water itself is murky, recycled, and probably contains more bacteria than a modern petri dish, but it's still preferable to not bathing at all, which tells you everything you need to know about the general state of medieval cleanliness standards. Your teeth, if you still have them by middle age, are cleaned with rough cloths, salt when it's available, or small sticks that you chew to fray the ends into primitive toothbrushes, and dental problems are solved through extraction using methods that would be considered torture in modern times but are standard medical practice in medieval villages, where pain management consists of getting drunk enough to pass out during procedures. The collective body odor of a medieval village is something that modern noses accustomed to daily showers, deodorants, and scented soaps would find absolutely overwhelming and probably nauseating to the point of actual vomiting. Imagine the strongest gym locker room smell you've ever encountered, multiply it by about 50, add the aroma of rotting food, human waste, animal dung, industrial processes like tanning and dyeing, and various cooking smells from foods that aren't exactly fresh to begin with, and you're starting to approach the olfactory experience of medieval village life. People's clothing retains odors for months because washing is infrequent and soap is ineffective, creating a layered aromatic experience that tells the story of everything that person has been doing for the past season. You can literally smell someone's occupation, their economic status, their general health, and their recent activities just by being in the same room with them, which sounds like a useful superpower until you realize that most of what you're smelling is deeply unpleasant and occasionally indicates serious medical conditions that are going untreated, because medieval medicine is basically witchcraft with extra steps. The air inside buildings is thick with human odors, cooking smells, smoke from fires, and the general funk of spaces that are never properly ventilated or cleaned, creating an atmosphere that would require gas masks in modern times, but which medieval people just accepted as normal background ambiance for daily life. Speaking of medical conditions, let's dive into the absolutely delightful world of medieval healthcare, where the cure is often worse than the disease and survival depends more on luck than any actual medical knowledge or effective treatment options. Doctors, in the rare instances when they're available and you can afford them, are educated in medical theories that are based on ancient texts rather than actual observation or scientific method, leading to treatments that range from useless to actively harmful and occasionally fatal. The prevailing medical theory involves balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, through techniques like bloodletting, purging, and various herbal remedies that are often more toxic than therapeutic and sometimes speed up the dying process rather than promoting healing. Bloodletting is considered a cure-all treatment for everything from headaches to heart problems, and it's performed using unsanitary instruments by practitioners who don't understand basic principles like infection control or the importance of not draining patients of the blood they need to stay alive. Surgery, when it's attempted at all, is performed without anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium, if you're incredibly lucky, using instruments that aren't sterilized and techniques that are learned through apprenticeship rather than formal medical education, resulting in success rates that would be considered criminal malpractice in modern times, but represent the cutting edge of medieval medical technology. Most medieval people never see an actual doctor in their entire lives because medical care is expensive, scarce, and often provided by traveling practitioners whose qualifications range from questionable to completely fictional, and whose treatments are as likely to kill you as cure you. Instead, medical care is provided by family members, neighbors, or local wise women who use folk remedies passed down through generations, herbal treatments that sometimes work through pure accident, and prayer-based healing that relies on divine intervention rather than medical science. These folk remedies include everything from poultices made with herbs and animal dung to drinking concoctions brewed from plants that are occasionally poisonous and always unregulated, creating a healthcare system that operates on trial and error with heavy emphasis on the error part. Childbirth is attended by midwives whose training consists of observing other births and learning traditional techniques that haven't been updated in centuries, leading to maternal and infant mortality rates that would be considered a public health crisis in modern times, but are just accepted as natural and unavoidable parts of life in medieval villages. Broken bones are set using primitive techniques and heal improperly, leaving people permanently disabled and in chronic pain that lasts for the rest of their lives, which might not be very long considering the general state of medieval healthcare and nutrition. The concept of mental health is completely unknown in medieval villages, where psychological conditions are attributed to demonic possession, divine punishment, or moral weakness, rather than medical issues that might respond to treatment or compassion. People suffering from what we would recognize as depression, anxiety, PTSD, or other mental health conditions are often ostracized from the community, accused of witchcraft, or simply left to cope with their conditions using whatever resources they can find, which usually means alcohol, religious devotion, or various herbal remedies that are more likely to cause hallucinations than provide actual therapeutic benefit. The stress of medieval life, constant worry about survival, frequent deaths of family members, economic uncertainty, political instability, and the general brutality of daily existence create psychological conditions that would require extensive therapy and medication in modern times, but are just considered normal parts of the human experience that everyone has to endure without complaint or assistance. Sleep disorders are common because medieval beds are uncomfortable, shared with multiple people and various insects, and sleep is frequently interrupted by everything from household emergencies to raids by bandits or soldiers, creating chronic exhaustion that affects every aspect of daily life but is just accepted as another unavoidable hardship that comes with being alive in medieval times. Let's talk about the absolutely fascinating world of medieval law and order, where justice is swift, brutal, and often has very little to do with actual guilt or innocence, and where your legal rights depend entirely on your social status, economic position, and relationship with whoever happens to be in charge at the moment. The legal system is based on feudal relationships rather than consistent laws applied equally to everyone, meaning that your lord has almost unlimited authority over your life and can punish you for essentially anything he considers inappropriate, inconvenient, or simply annoying on any given day. Court proceedings, when they occur at all, are often based on medieval concepts like trial by ordeal, where your guilt or innocence is determined by your ability to survive being burned, drowned, or otherwise physically tested in ways that are designed to reveal divine judgment rather than actual evidence of wrongdoing. The assumption is that God will protect the innocent and allow the guilty to suffer, which is a lovely religious sentiment but a terrible foundation for a justice system that routinely kills innocent people while allowing actual criminals to escape punishment through luck, corruption, or simple political connections. Property rights are practically non-existent for peasants who technically own nothing and can have their possessions confiscated by their lord at any time for any reason or no reason at all, creating a legal environment where accumulating wealth or improving your living conditions is pointless because everything you have can be taken away on a whim. Debts are inherited by your children and can result in your entire family being enslaved or having their already minimal possessions seized to satisfy obligations that they had no role in creating, ensuring that poverty and desperation are passed down through generations like genetic diseases that can't be cured. Legal contracts, when they exist at all, are often oral agreements witnessed by community members who may or may not remember the details accurately and whose testimony can be influenced by personal relationships, bribes, or simple intimidation by whoever has more power in the situation. Marriage contracts, business agreements, and land rental arrangements are all subject to interpretation by whoever has the most influence with local authorities, making every legal relationship a potential source of conflict that could result in financial ruin or physical punishment depending on how the wind blows on any given day. Criminal punishment in medieval villages is public, brutal, and designed more for entertainment and deterrence than rehabilitation or justice, with penalties that range from public humiliation to torture and execution for crimes that modern legal systems would handle with fines or short jail sentences. Theft of food, which is often motivated by starvation rather than greed, can result in having your hand cut off, making it impossible to work and virtually guaranteeing that you'll either starve to death or be forced to rely on charity that may or may not be available when you need it. Public executions are community events that draw crowds and serve as both entertainment and moral instruction, with methods that are designed to be as painful and prolonged as possible to maximize the deterrent effect and satisfy the community's desire for dramatic justice. The stocks and pillory are used for minor offenses and social infractions, subjecting criminals to public humiliation, physical abuse from passers-by, and exposure to weather conditions that can be dangerous or fatal depending on the season and the length of the sentence. Banishment from the village is considered a serious punishment because survival outside the community is extremely difficult and often impossible for people who don't have resources, connections, or skills that would allow them to establish themselves elsewhere, making exile equivalent to a slow death sentence that simply takes longer to execute than more direct methods. The fascinating world of medieval economics is a system designed to keep everyone except the nobility in a state of permanent poverty and dependence that makes modern concerns about income inequality look like minor bookkeeping discrepancies. Your economic relationship with your lord is essentially feudal slavery disguised as a rental agreement where you work his land, pay him taxes on everything you produce, and provide various forms of unpaid labor whenever he demands it, all in exchange for the privilege of living in a hovel on his property and keeping whatever scraps are left over after he's taken his share of your productivity. The tax burden on medieval peasants would make modern taxpayers revolt immediately, with obligations that include a percentage of all crops grown, payment for using the Lord's mill to grind grain, fees for getting married or inheriting property, and various special assessments whenever the Lord needs money for wars, building projects, or simply maintaining his lifestyle at a level appropriate to his social status. These taxes are collected regardless of crop failures, personal hardships, or family emergencies, ensuring that bad years can push families from poverty into destitution and starvation without any consideration for human suffering or basic survival needs. The local economy operates on a barter system supplemented by primitive currency that fluctuates in value based on factors that are completely beyond your control, making long-term planning impossible and ensuring that economic relationships are always subject to sudden changes that can destroy years of careful saving and preparation. Prices for basic necessities like food, clothing, and tools vary dramatically based on harvest conditions, political stability, and the whims of merchants who can manipulate supply and demand to maximize their profits, while ordinary people struggle to survive on incomes that barely cover essential needs, even in good years. Credit is available from money lenders who charge interest rates that would be considered usury in modern times, and who can seize borrowers' property and family members if debts aren't repaid according to terms that are often deliberately impossible to meet, creating debt slavery that traps entire families in cycles of poverty that last for generations. The guild system controls most trades and crafts through monopolistic practices that limit competition, fix prices, and restrict membership to people who can afford the fees and have the proper social connections, ensuring that economic opportunity is reserved for those who are already wealthy or well-connected, rather than being based on skill, innovation, or hard work. Your prospects for economic advancement are essentially non-existent unless you're willing and able to leave everything behind and seek your fortune in larger towns or cities, which comes with its own set of risks, including increased crime, disease, exploitation by urban employers, and the loss of whatever limited social support network you might have in your village. The majority of medieval peasants lived their entire lives in the same village where they were born, working the same fields their parents worked, using the same tools and techniques that have been passed down for generations, and facing the same economic challenges that have kept their families in poverty for as long as anyone can remember. Social mobility is so rare that it's considered miraculous when it happens, and usually requires extraordinary circumstances like war, plague, or political upheaval that create opportunities for people who are willing to risk everything for a chance at a slightly better life that still wouldn't meet modern standards for basic human dignity and economic security. The daily reality of medieval economics means that every purchase decision is a calculation of survival priorities, where buying soap means less money for food, acquiring better tools means going without adequate clothing, and any unexpected expense can trigger a financial crisis that threatens your family's ability to survive the winter months when work is scarce and heating costs consume whatever savings you might have accumulated during better times. The concept of disposable income is completely foreign to medieval peasants, who spend their entire lives in a constant state of financial emergency, where the difference between life and death can be measured in copper coins, and where the loss of a single day's work due to illness or injury can start a downward spiral that leads to debt, dependency, and eventual starvation. Now let's discuss the absolutely delightful topic of medieval food safety and nutrition, where every meal is an adventure in bacterial roulette and your digestive system faces daily challenges that would hospitalize modern people and probably violate several international agreements on human rights and basic dignity. Food preservation techniques in medieval villages are primitive, unreliable, and often create conditions that encourage rather than prevent the growth of harmful microorganisms that can cause everything from mild stomach upset to death by food poisoning. And distinguishing between safe and dangerous food requires expertise that most people acquire through trial and error, with heavy emphasis on the error part. Meat is preserved through smoking, salting, and drying processes that sometimes work, but often result in products that are spoiled, rancid, or contaminated with bacteria that cause serious illness. And the lack of refrigeration means that fresh meat must be consumed immediately after slaughter or risk becoming a breeding ground for pathogens that can kill entire families if they're unlucky enough to eat contaminated food at the wrong time. Dairy products are particularly dangerous because pasteurization won't be invented for several more centuries, making milk, cheese, and butter potential sources of tuberculosis, brucellosis, and various other diseases that can be transmitted from infected animals to human consumers who have no way of testing food safety before consumption. Grain storage is a constant battle against rodents, insects, and mold that contaminate food supplies and create health hazards ranging from malnutrition to ergot poisoning, which causes hallucinations, convulsions, and death in cases where infected grain is consumed in sufficient quantities to trigger serious toxic reactions. Bread, the staple of medieval diet, is often made with grain that's been contaminated with rat droppings, insect parts, and various forms of fungus that add both flavor and toxicity to the final product, creating meals that provide calories but also deliver doses of harmful substances that accumulate in the body over time and cause chronic health problems that are attributed to divine will rather than food safety issues. Fruits and vegetables, when available, are grown using human and animal waste as fertilizer, creating contamination that can't be removed by the washing techniques available to medieval peasants, and ensuring that fresh produce carries risks of intestinal parasites and bacterial infections that cause chronic diarrhea, malnutrition, and eventually death from complications related to poor sanitation and inadequate medical care. Water used for cooking and drinking is drawn from wells and streams that are contaminated with human waste, animal carcasses, and runoff from various industries that dump toxic materials into water supplies without any regard for public health or environmental consequences, making every drink a potential exposure to diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid that regularly kill significant portions of village populations during epidemic outbreaks. The brewing of ale and beer provides safer liquid options, but the alcohol content is low and the nutritional value is minimal, creating a situation where people are mildly intoxicated most of the time but still malnourished and susceptible to diseases that proper nutrition could help prevent. Cooking techniques are primitive and inconsistent, using open fires and crude cookware that make it difficult to achieve the temperatures and cooking times necessary to kill harmful bacteria and parasites in food, resulting in meals that are often undercooked in some areas and burned in others, providing an uneven dining experience that combines the risks of food poisoning with the disappointment of ruined ingredients that can't be replaced easily or cheaply. Spices and seasonings, when available, are used not just for flavor but to mask the taste and smell of food that's beginning to spoil, creating culinary traditions that prioritize food preservation over palatability, and leading to dining experiences that would challenge even the most adventurous modern food enthusiasts. The lack of understanding about nutritional requirements means that medieval diets are deficient in essential vitamins and minerals, causing diseases like scurvy, rickets, and pellagra that weaken immune systems and make people more susceptible to infections and injuries that might be survivable with proper nutrition and medical care. Seasonal food shortages are regular occurrences that force people to consume whatever's available, including foods that are normally fed to animals, plants that are marginally edible, and preserved foods that have been stored so long they're more hazardous than nutritious, but represent the only alternatives to starvation during lean periods. The period between winter and spring, known as the hunger gap, is when stored food runs out before new crops are ready for harvest, creating annual famines that test the survival skills of entire communities and eliminate the weakest members of the population through malnutrition and diseases that are exacerbated by hunger and poor living conditions. Food distribution within families prioritizes adult males who perform the heaviest labor, followed by other adults, with children and elderly people receiving whatever remains after everyone else has eaten, creating nutritional hierarchies that sacrifice the most vulnerable family members during times of scarcity, and ensuring that survival rates vary dramatically based on age, gender, and physical capability. The social aspects of medieval village life create a community atmosphere that combines the worst features of small-town gossip, religious extremism, and surveillance state monitoring, where everyone knows everything about everyone else's business and privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries. Your personal relationships, financial situation, family problems, and even intimate details of your marriage are common knowledge among your neighbors, who use this information for everything from social entertainment to blackmail and manipulation, creating an environment where personal secrets are impossible to maintain and social pressure is constant and overwhelming. Religious observance is mandatory and monitored by both clergy and fellow villagers, who report any signs of heresy, blasphemy, or insufficient devotion to authorities, who can impose penalties ranging from public penance to excommunication to actual execution, depending on the severity of your religious infractions and the political climate of the moment. Church attendance is required regardless of illness, weather conditions, or personal emergencies, and missing services without acceptable excuses can result in social ostracism, economic penalties, and suspicion of heretical beliefs that can destroy your reputation and livelihood within the community. The village social hierarchy is rigidly enforced through a combination of legal authority, economic dependency, and social pressure that makes challenging the established order extremely dangerous and virtually impossible for ordinary peasants who lack the resources and connections necessary to resist oppression from their social superiors. Your behavior, speech, clothing, and even facial expressions are constantly scrutinized for signs of disrespect, insubordination, or inappropriate ambition that might suggest you're forgetting your proper place in the social order, and any perceived violations of class boundaries can result in swift and severe punishment that serves as an example to others who might be tempted to challenge established authority. Marriage arrangements are controlled by parents and lords who view matrimony as an economic and political transaction rather than a personal choice based on affection or compatibility, leading to unions between people who may barely know each other and who have no legal or practical recourse if their marriages prove to be unhappy, abusive, or otherwise unsatisfactory. Divorce is essentially impossible for ordinary peasants who are trapped in marriages that may last for decades regardless of domestic violence, incompatibility, or mutual hatred. Creating household environments that can be toxic and dangerous but which must be endured because there are no alternatives available to people who lack the wealth and connections necessary to obtain religious annulments or legal separations. Social entertainment in medieval villages revolves around religious festivals, seasonal celebrations, and public events that serve multiple functions as community bonding experiences, religious observances, and opportunities for social control through collective participation in approved activities that reinforce established values and hierarchies. These events often involve heavy drinking, crude humor, and various forms of physical entertainment that can be dangerous for participants and spectators alike, but they provide rare breaks from the grinding routine of agricultural labor and offer opportunities for social interaction that are otherwise limited by work schedules and geographical isolation. Gossip and rumor mongering are primary forms of entertainment that can destroy reputations, ruin marriages, and create social conflicts that divide communities and sometimes lead to violence between families or factions within the village, making social relationships complex and potentially dangerous for people who become the subject of malicious talk or false accusations. The treatment of social outcasts, including disabled people, mentally ill individuals, and anyone who doesn't conform to community standards of behavior or belief, is harsh and often brutal, with exclusion from social and economic networks that can make survival difficult or impossible for people who depend on community cooperation for basic necessities like food, shelter, and protection from external threats. Women who are unmarried, widowed, or otherwise without male protection are particularly vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft, sexual misconduct, or other crimes that can result in punishments ranging from social ostracism to torture and execution, creating a social environment where female independence is dangerous and conformity to restrictive gender roles is essential for survival. The elderly and infirm are valued only as long as they can contribute to household productivity. And when they become burdens rather than assets, they may find themselves neglected, abused, or simply allowed to die from lack of care and attention, reflecting a society where human value is measured primarily in terms of economic utility rather than intrinsic worth or moral considerations. Let's explore the absolutely delightful world of medieval warfare and its impact on village life, where armed conflicts are frequent, brutal, and devastating to civilian populations who have no voice in political decisions but bear the full cost of their lords' military ambitions and territorial disputes. Wars between nobles, invasions by foreign armies, and raids by bandits or rival villages create a constant atmosphere of insecurity and fear that affects every aspect of daily life, from agricultural planning to travel arrangements to the basic question of whether your family will survive until the next harvest season. Your lord's military obligations mean that you and your sons may be conscripted for military service at any time, regardless of your farming responsibilities, family needs, or personal qualifications for combat, and refusing to serve can result in punishment, imprisonment, or death for treason against your feudal superior. Medieval warfare is particularly devastating for peasant communities because armies on all sides view civilian populations as legitimate targets for pillaging, rape, and massacre, treating villages as supply depots that can be looted at will, and regarding peasant lives as expendable resources that can be sacrificed for strategic or tactical advantages. The approach of any armed force, whether friendly or hostile, signals potential disaster for village inhabitants who have no effective means of defense and whose possessions, livestock, and family members are all vulnerable to seizure by soldiers who operate under military law that gives them broad authority to take whatever they need or want from civilian populations. Crops are trampled or confiscated to feed armies. Buildings are destroyed for building materials or simply for entertainment. And women are routinely raped by soldiers who face no meaningful consequences for sexual violence against peasant victims who have no legal recourse or social protection. The economic impact of warfare on village life is catastrophic and long-lasting, with tax increases to fund military campaigns, mandatory contributions of food and supplies to support armies, and the loss of agricultural productivity when fields are abandoned due to security concerns or lack of available labor due to military conscription and war casualties. Recovery from wartime devastation can take decades, during which time surviving villagers must rebuild their homes, replace lost livestock, and restore agricultural productivity while dealing with reduced population, damaged infrastructure, and the psychological trauma of experiencing or witnessing extreme violence that would require extensive therapy in modern times, but is simply accepted as an unavoidable part of medieval life. The weapons and armor available to peasant conscripts are primitive and inadequate for medieval combat, consisting mainly of agricultural tools adapted for fighting, makeshift weapons created from whatever materials are available, and used equipment that has been discarded by professional soldiers after becoming damaged or obsolete. Training is minimal and focuses on basic formations and simple tactics rather than individual combat skills, leaving peasant soldiers vulnerable to experienced warriors who have better equipment, superior training, and professional experience in medieval warfare techniques. Medical care for wounded soldiers is virtually non-existent, with battlefield injuries treated using primitive techniques that often cause more harm than healing, and survival rates for serious wounds are extremely low due to infection, blood loss, and lack of understanding about trauma medicine and surgical procedures. The psychological impact of medieval warfare on surviving participants and their families creates long-term mental health problems that manifest as what we would recognize as PTSD, survivor guilt, and various anxiety disorders that go untreated because medieval society lacks understanding of psychological trauma and its effects on human behavior and emotional well-being. Veterans who survive combat often return home permanently disabled, emotionally damaged, and unable to readjust to civilian life, creating additional burdens on families and communities that are already struggling with the economic and social consequences of wartime destruction and population loss. Now let's delve into the fascinating world of medieval disease and epidemic management, where public health measures consist mainly of prayer and the occasional burning of suspicious individuals, and where a simple cut or scratch can lead to a lingering death from infection that modern antibiotics could prevent with a single dose of medication. The medieval understanding of disease transmission is based on theories about miasma or bad air that supposedly carries illness, leading to public health strategies that are not only ineffective but often counterproductive, such as closing windows and doors during epidemics to keep out the bad air while actually creating perfect conditions for disease transmission in crowded, poorly ventilated spaces. Medical authorities recommend treatments that include bloodletting to balance the humors, prayers and religious rituals to appease divine wrath, and various herbal remedies that range from harmless but useless to actively toxic and potentially fatal for patients who are already weakened by illness. Epidemic diseases like the Black Death, smallpox, typhus, and influenza sweep through medieval villages with devastating regularity, killing anywhere from 20 to 60% of the population during major outbreaks and leaving survivors to deal with the social, economic, and psychological consequences of mass death that overwhelms normal coping mechanisms and creates long-term trauma that affects entire generations. The lack of understanding about quarantine procedures means that sick individuals continue to interact with healthy family members and neighbors, spreading disease throughout communities that have no effective means of containing outbreaks once they begin. And the medieval practice of gathering in churches for special prayers during epidemics actually accelerates transmission by concentrating infected and susceptible individuals in enclosed spaces where respiratory diseases spread rapidly through congregations. Personal hygiene practices that might prevent or reduce disease transmission are limited by lack of soap, scarcity of clean water, and cultural beliefs that associate bathing with moral weakness or dangerous exposure to evil influences, creating living conditions that are ideal for the spread of infectious diseases through populations that are already weakened by malnutrition, stress, and various chronic health conditions. Waste disposal methods in medieval villages create additional health hazards by contaminating water supplies, attracting disease-carrying insects and rodents, and creating breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites that cause intestinal diseases, skin infections, and respiratory problems that compound the health challenges facing people who are already living on the margins of survival. The treatment of plague victims and other seriously ill individuals involves isolation techniques that are often tantamount to abandonment, with sick people being left alone to die without adequate food, water, or medical care because healthy family members are afraid of catching the disease and cannot afford to risk their own lives caring for patients who are likely to die regardless of the quality of attention they receive. Mass graves are common during major epidemics, with bodies buried in large pits without individual markers or religious ceremonies because the death toll overwhelms the community's ability to provide proper funerals for individual victims, creating psychological trauma for survivors who cannot properly mourn their lost family members and friends. The economic consequences of epidemic disease include labor shortages that affect agricultural productivity, abandonment of villages when population levels fall below sustainable thresholds, and social disruption that can lead to the breakdown of law and order as traditional authorities die or flee and survivors struggle to maintain community institutions that require minimum levels of participation and leadership to function effectively. Recovery from major epidemics can take generations, with survivors facing the challenge of rebuilding communities, maintaining agricultural knowledge and practices, and preserving cultural traditions with reduced populations that may lack the skills and experience necessary to maintain complex social and economic systems. Let's examine the absolutely charming world of medieval justice and punishment, where the legal system operates on principles that would make modern civil rights advocates weep with frustration, and where your chances of receiving fair treatment depend more on your social status and political connections than on actual evidence or established legal procedures. Trial procedures in medieval villages are based on concepts like compurgation, where your innocence is determined by your ability to find enough respectable community members willing to swear oaths supporting your version of events, regardless of whether these witnesses actually know anything about the case or are simply friends who want to help you avoid punishment. Judicial combat is considered a legitimate method of determining guilt or innocence, with the assumption that God will ensure victory for the righteous party, leading to legal outcomes that depend on physical strength, combat skills, and luck, rather than facts or evidence related to the actual crime being adjudicated. Trial by ordeal subjects accused individuals to physical tests that are designed to reveal divine judgment about their guilt or innocence, including procedures like carrying red-hot iron bars, plunging hands into boiling water, or being thrown into ponds to see if they float or sink, with survival or specific physical outcomes interpreted as signs of divine favor or condemnation. These procedures are often fatal or cause permanent injury regardless of the accused person's actual guilt or innocence, making medieval justice more dangerous than many of the crimes it's supposed to punish, and the religious justification for these practices makes them immune to criticism or reform by people who might recognize their obvious flaws and injustices. Punishment for convicted criminals is public, brutal, and designed to serve as entertainment and moral instruction for community members who gather to witness executions, floggings, and various forms of torture that are considered appropriate responses to crimes ranging from theft to adultery to expressing opinions that authorities consider dangerous or heretical. Capital punishment is common for a wide range of offenses that modern legal systems would handle with fines or imprisonment, and execution methods are deliberately painful and prolonged to maximize the deterrent effect and satisfy the community's desire for dramatic justice that provides emotional satisfaction rather than actual crime prevention or rehabilitation of offenders. The concept of legal representation is virtually unknown to medieval peasants, who must defend themselves against accusations without access to trained advocates, legal research, or procedural knowledge that might help them navigate court systems that are designed to favor authority figures and maintain existing social hierarchies rather than ensure fair treatment for all participants. Judges are often local nobles or their representatives who have personal, political, and economic relationships with one or more parties in legal disputes, creating conflicts of interest that influence legal outcomes and make objective justice difficult or impossible to achieve in cases where powerful individuals have stakes in the proceedings. Legal precedent and consistent application of laws are rare because most legal decisions are made by individual authorities who interpret rules according to their personal preferences, political considerations, and economic interests, creating a justice system where similar crimes can result in vastly different punishments, depending on when, where, and by whom they are adjudicated. Written legal codes are uncommon and often inaccessible to ordinary people who cannot read, making it difficult for individuals to understand their rights and obligations under laws that may change without notice based on the whims of local authorities or political developments that affect legal interpretation and enforcement. The enforcement of legal decisions relies on community cooperation and social pressure rather than professional law enforcement agencies, meaning that unpopular verdicts may be ignored or undermined by local residents who disagree with court decisions, while popular punishments may be carried out with excessive enthusiasm by community members who view public punishment as entertainment and an opportunity to participate in sanctioned violence against social outcasts and convicted criminals. Finally, let's discuss the absolutely delightful topic of medieval sanitation and waste management, where human engineering ingenuity finds its lowest expression in systems that would violate every modern health code and probably constitute crimes against humanity under current international law. The typical medieval village latrine is a communal facility that serves multiple families and consists of a wooden seat built over a pit that is rarely cleaned and never properly maintained, creating a festering bacterial paradise that attracts flies, produces toxic gases, and contaminates groundwater supplies that may be used for drinking and cooking by people who don't understand the connection between waste disposal and waterborne disease. These facilities offer no privacy, no weather protection, and no safety features to prevent users from falling into the waste pit, making every visit to the latrine an adventure in balancing personal necessity against physical danger and social embarrassment. Indoor plumbing is completely unknown to medieval peasants who dispose of human waste using chamber pots that are emptied into yards, streets, or nearby streams without regard for the health consequences of contaminating living spaces and water supplies with untreated sewage that carries bacteria, parasites, and viral pathogens that cause diseases ranging from mild intestinal upset to fatal infections that can kill entire families. The practice of throwing waste out of windows and doors creates unsanitary living conditions that attract insects and rodents, produce nauseating odors, and create slippery surfaces that are dangerous for pedestrians who must navigate streets and pathways that are literally covered with human and animal excrement. Animal waste disposal is handled with the same casual disregard for sanitation that characterizes human waste management, with livestock living in close proximity to human habitations and depositing their excrement wherever convenient, creating barnyard conditions that extend throughout village living areas and make it impossible to maintain clean spaces for food preparation, childcare, or any other activities that might benefit from basic hygiene standards. The integration of animals into household spaces means that human living areas are constantly contaminated with animal waste, parasites, and disease-causing microorganisms that create health hazards for people who have no understanding of disease transmission and no practical means of maintaining sanitary conditions, even if they understood the importance of cleanliness for disease prevention. Garbage disposal consists mainly of throwing refuse into streets, yards, or nearby bodies of water, creating accumulations of rotting organic matter that attract scavenging animals, produce offensive odors, and serve as breeding grounds for insects and bacteria that spread disease and contaminate food supplies. Composting and recycling are practiced to some extent, but more from economic necessity than environmental consciousness, with organic waste being used as fertilizer and manufactured items being repaired and reused until they literally fall apart, creating a recycling system that is motivated by poverty rather than ecological awareness. The cumulative effect of medieval sanitation practices creates living environments that are so contaminated and unhealthy that survival requires immune systems that have been hardened by constant exposure to pathogens, toxins, and disease-causing organisms that would overwhelm modern people who have been protected by antibiotics, vaccines, and sanitation systems that medieval peasants could not even imagine. The smell alone would be enough to incapacitate visitors from the modern era, who would find the olfactory assault of medieval village life overwhelming and probably nauseating to the point of actual physical illness. So there you have it, a single day in a medieval village where survival requires physical stamina, psychological resilience, and immune system capabilities that modern humans simply don't possess, and where every aspect of daily life presents challenges that would defeat most contemporary people within hours of their arrival in this historical nightmare. Your romantic notions of medieval life, fostered by movies and television shows that sanitize historical reality for modern audiences, would evaporate within minutes of experiencing the authentic smells, sounds, and sensations of genuine medieval existence, where even the most basic human needs are met through systems that are primitive, dangerous, and often more harmful than helpful. The next time you complain about modern inconveniences, like slow internet or lukewarm coffee, remember that medieval peasants would have considered indoor plumbing, electric lighting, and access to clean drinking water to be miracles beyond their wildest dreams, and that your worst day in the 21st century is probably better than the best day most people experienced during humanity's charming medieval period. Sweet dreams, and don't forget to appreciate the antibiotics that keep you alive, the sanitation systems that prevent disease, and the legal protections that ensure you won't be burned as a witch for expressing opinions that medieval authorities might have found threatening or inappropriate. Medieval life wasn't just nasty, brutish, and short. It was a daily struggle for survival that would challenge even the most prepared and determined modern person. And the fact that humanity managed to survive this period and eventually develop better systems for meeting basic human needs is perhaps the greatest testament to human resilience and ingenuity in our entire historical record.